Hey there, my name is Dr. Matthew Shim. I'm the owner of Peak Brain Performance Centers, and I specialize in working with patients who are struggling with various chronic illnesses and neurological injuries. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than any other video I've done in the past. As you can see, this video is going to be a long one. So here's my plan, and by the time we get to the end of this thing, I want you to tell me whether or not you think that I've accomplished this goal or not. My plan is to walk you through all the contributors to brain fog and cognitive decline, and also share with you the overarching things that can be done to improve the health of your brain in order to get you feeling sharp once again. Before we dive into the nitty gritty, I want to say that it's my opinion that when it comes to working with patients, specifically patients who have brains that are not working as well as they should, it becomes much easier on my end actually being able to manage these cases, and ultimately what you care about, that being the results that you tend to see, also tend to be much greater when I can lay out a systematic approach as to how we will improve the function of this pile of mush that resides between our ears, as compared to what I think many providers do, that being, hey, try doing this, whatever it may be, that intervention failing, moving on to the next thing, it failing, and just doing that over and over and over until you, as the patient, notice some degree of improvement or decide to jump ship and move on with somebody else. A mentor of mine, Dr. Ted Carrick, once said that if you get a patient better, it doesn't mean that you've done the right thing, it just means that you didn't do so much of the wrong thing. I share that to say, so often, whether it be within traditional or even alternative healthcare, or just when amongst friends, solutions to certain problems, brain fog in this instance, are handed out with the caveat, this is what I did, so why don't you try it? I see this so often. In fact, just this week I had a new patient and she listed out all of the supplements that she was taking on her intake form. There was like 12 of them. And I went through each one asking, so why are you taking this? And at least 8 of them were, well, I had a friend tell me to take this, or I heard that this was good for whatever she was coming to see me for. So what I want to do in this video is show you how there are so many possible contributors to your brain not functioning as well as it should, and then equip you with the ability to look at all these brain fog buster supplements and say, well, yeah, that could definitely help if my brain fog is due to X mechanism. But if it's not, well, then you're probably going to still have brain fog. My point in saying all that is that when it comes to all other aspects of life, whether you're building a car or a house or a cake, we all understand that there are steps that must be completed before moving on to the next. And for some reason, we forget that when it comes to healthcare. So if you're looking for a video that will tell you to take these 5 supplements to improve your brain, you may as well log off now. If that is the approach you're looking for, then maybe you do see some success with whatever you try. But remember what Dr. Carrick said. Just because you get a patient better doesn't mean that you've done the right thing. It just means you didn't do so much of the wrong thing. And for me personally, I like getting people better. And I'm also very cognizant on what I'm asking my patients to purchase. So in the event that I ever ask you to purchase something, I want there to be a high probability that that money was put to good use. I want to stack the odds in my favor, or I guess it would be your favor. The first thing we have to do is optimize fuel to the mitochondria. So let's lay some groundwork and first talk about what the heck a mitochondria is. If you can remember way back to grade school, you were taught that the mitochondria is the, say it with me, powerhouse of the cell. What does that mean? The powerhouse is referring to just that. It supplies the power to your cells. Just like how your automobile needs fuel in order to get you from point A to point B, it's the gas station that fuels your cells. And unlike your vehicle that uses gasoline or electricity, or in my case, diesel, the mitochondria fuels our cells by creating ATP, adenosine triphosphate. No need to remember that big word, just know that it creates ATP. And ATP is the energy source that all of our cells run off of. And since we're talking about brain health specifically, we'll be referring to the cells within your brain, also known as neurons, and the ability to optimize the mitochondria's production of ATP for those neurons. So the first step to improve the health of your brain will revolve around giving these mitochondria the appropriate substrates in order to create ATP. Now, for this first step to take place within the inner workings of our brain, this next concept will be important, and so try and follow me. Think about how when you roll into the gas station, the fuel that comes out of that pump isn't just coming straight out of the earth. No, there was a company that had to mix all these compounds together, put it in a tanker, and then have it to deliver to whatever station in which you purchased that fuel. I want you to think of the mitochondria in a similar light. It doesn't just create ATP. there have to be a couple substrates present within the mitochondria for it to create ATP. Just like how a flower needs sunlight and water in order to bloom. Now, you must be wondering, what is that sunlight and water? What are the things that these mitochondria need in order to produce ATP? I'm glad you asked. The first one is glucose. Now, we get glucose through our diet, mainly from foods that are rich in carbohydrates. And when it comes to glucose or blood sugar, the important thing is the ability to regulate our blood sugar. Let's first go through the basic mechanism. When you eat something, the glucose from that food makes its way into your blood, and the only problem with that is it's not very useful within the blood. It needs to make its way out of the blood and into the mitochondria, and the mitochondria is located within the cells, which is outside of the blood. Think of your blood vessels like a road within a neighborhood. In order to get in any of these homes, you have to first pass through that homeowner's gate. So when that glucose needs to make its way into the cells and ultimately into the mitochondria, your pancreas will release insulin. And insulin works like the key that goes to unlock the gate and escort it into the house or the cell. But if that glucose is too high and your pancreas has to keep secreting insulin in an effort to get that glucose out of the blood and into your cells, you can end up developing what is called insulin resistance. So here's an example that you can use to understand this a little bit better. If you stay at a hotel and your checkout time is 11 a.m., but let's say you went somewhere and then tried to come back to your room at noon, your key card is obviously not going to work anymore because technically that room is no longer yours. You have overstayed your welcome. This is what can happen with insulin resistance. Your key doesn't work anymore. So we don't want high blood sugar levels, but we also don't want low blood sugar levels as well. It's a balancing act. High blood sugar can lead to that key or insulin not working, as well as damage to your blood vessels, increased inflammation, and a few other things as well. But in order to keep this video shorter and concise, we're just going to go into those things and not go into all the minute details. So that was high blood sugar or hyperglycemia. So counter to that, we have low blood sugar, which is like living in a desolate area where there are no cars that drive by. There are no cars that come through your gate because nobody goes out there. You live out in the boonies. Hopefully that does a good job at painting a picture of the fact that being able to regulate your blood sugar, making sure that it isn't too high and that it isn't too low, is one important factor for supplying the mitochondria with the resources necessary in order to create ATP. When trying to decipher whether or not you have an issue with this mechanism, one thing you could do is run some blood and actually get objective measures. But even easier than that is you could simply ask yourself, do I notice any energy changes after my meals? Whether improved or actually feeling more tired after meals, either one is an indicator that your blood sugar levels are not being regulated as well as they should be. The only thing that should happen after your meals is you should no longer feel hungry. If you consistently feel tired after your meals, you likely have insulin resistance or maybe even full-blown diabetes. If this is you, something I would recommend doing is trying a keto diet. Reason being is that the mitochondria uses glucose as one of its fuel sources to create ATP, but it can also use ketone bodies as an alternative. So if you have insulin resistance, switching to a ketogenic diet can give your pancreas a little break because your body will switch to using ketone bodies as fuel instead of glucose. On the other end of the spectrum, if your blood sugar is really low, you're a hypoglycemic. These patients typically feel energized after meals. This is because what can happen, especially if you have a poor diet that consists of infrequent meals and meals that are filled with simple carbs, is in between meals when your body is using that glucose, your glucose stores will get low, meaning mitochondria can't make ATP. And then once you eat, all of a sudden those mitochondria have more glucose, which enhances ATP production, increasing your energy levels. For these individuals, generally I recommend to eat more complex carbs because they're digested at a slower rate, meaning they're less likely to lead to a rapid spike in blood sugar. And if that isn't enough, we can couple that with also eating more frequently. The other thing your mitochondria need is oxygen. And when it comes to impairment of oxygen, there are numerous possibilities, starting off with the obvious of actually breathing in oxygen. If we think about the journey of a molecule of oxygen, it first has to be inhaled. Once it becomes inhaled, it makes its way into your lungs, where it can be perfused across the tissues within the lungs and into the blood. As it gets into the bloodstream, the molecule of oxygen binds onto a red blood cell, where it then gets taken across the body to be used. So now, with that in mind, in order to optimize the function of your brain, we have to make sure that you have a healthy pulmonary system. If you have things like asthma or COPD or pulmonary fibrosis, the list goes on, I probably won't have the healthiest brain. On top of that, we have to have a healthy cardiovascular system. This is in large part because as that molecule of oxygen makes its way into your bloodstream, it binds onto a red blood cell. Think about a red blood cell like a pickup truck, and within the bed of that pickup truck, I can carry 4 molecules of oxygen. Well, if I own a fleet of pickup trucks, I can carry an abundance of oxygen, right? But if my fleet goes from, let's say, 10 pickup trucks to only 5, my ability to transport oxygen will not be as robust. So things I'm looking for are, do you have poor circulation, high or low blood pressure, anemia, etc.? All of these things will impair your ability to transport oxygen. The treatment interventions for this individual mechanism can be robust. If you have something wrong with your actual lungs, then you may need to see a pulmonologist. Do you have issues with your heart and its ability to contract at the right times in order to circulate blood around their body? Maybe you have so much plaque forming within your arteries that you need to consult with a vascular surgeon. We're only on step 1, but I hope that you're starting to see how just based on these 2 things, glucose and oxygen, there are so many possibilities already. So how can there be a brain fog supplement that helps everyone? Unfortunately, the supplement market is not regulated, and I think most people aren't going to their local vitamin shop looking for a specific nutrient. Instead, they read the label that says, this helps with brain fog. Well, I'll try that. The supplement manufacturers know that, and if they can slap a catchy label on the bottle, you'll be more inclined to buy it versus it saying something like ginkgo biloba. And that's step 1. This could take 2 weeks up to 2 months. It all depends, and for some this may not be significant at all and we can skip straight to step 2. On the contrary, if you're already doing things within step 2 or further, and this step number 1, has not already been managed, you're not setting yourself up for the greatest odds of success. This goes back to what I was saying before. In all other aspects of life, there are steps that must be taken before moving on to the next step. But when it comes to your health, we think we can just skip straight to the flashy stuff like detoxing heavy metals or optimizing hormones. Yes, those things are important, but you can't put a roof on a house that has yet to be framed. Same concepts apply. Continuing on, now that we've got our mitochondria producing ATP, that's cool, but we have to have the ability to protect them as well. Imagine you only have one local gas station in your town, and one evening it gets robbed and has to close down as a result. What are you going to do now? Well, you're going to have to go to the neighboring town in order to fuel your vehicle. You might be thinking, all right, that's not so bad, but also to make this analogy work, I want you to just follow me. You're now having to go fuel up at this new gas station, but also all the people that live in your area as well have to go to this new gas station, and all the people who already live in that neighboring town. So lines at the pump will start to grow. You now have a fewer amount of pumps to supply all of these cars. The same thing applies with your brain. Let's say ideally every single neuron has its own pump, its own mitochondria. But if mitochondria were to die, now the mitochondria left will have to supply more than one neuron. Do you see how being able to protect these little energy producing cells is pretty important? If our mitochondria figuratively get robbed and have to close down, the health of our brain ends up on a downward trajectory. Now, in the case of this local gas station, how we could have avoided this whole robbery situation is if we had security or police officers posted outside of the building. So within our body, what can serve as those police officers whose job is to protect the mitochondria? Before we get to that part, I want to discuss who the robbers would even be. Think about how every time that you eat something, the nutrients from that food are going to be used to keep this bag of flesh running. And then whatever is not necessary gets excreted as waste. The mitochondria is no different. The mitochondria takes in some nutrients, just like we do. It uses those nutrients to create ATP, but it also releases a little bit of waste. Now, keep following me because this is where this step becomes important. I think it would be fair to say that for most of us, hopefully we would prefer if our waste did not physically get on us. Well, the mitochondria is no different. They're just a little bit more dramatic. So once again, go back to what happens when you eat. We take in this food, our body uses whatever it needs, and then we excrete the rest as waste. Well, in the modern world, most of us have a commode that handles this waste, and the mitochondria does as well. The mitochondria uses antioxidants. And going back to what I was saying about it being more dramatic than you or I, if your antioxidant stores are low and there is nothing to take care of this waste product, it will actually go back and bind onto the mitochondria. And here's the kicker. When this happens, it destroys the entire thing, destroys the whole mitochondria. Now imagine this. You've done all this work to supply your mitochondria with the right resources to produce more ATP, but you have some sort of inflammatory condition. So now, one after one, those fresh new mitochondria start dying off, leading to the example I shared at the beginning, where now one fuel pump has to supply a number of cars instead of just a single one. Negating this effect will in large part have to do with the use of cleaning up your diet, supplementation, exercise, fasting potentially, and even improving your sleep and ability to cope with stress. Much of these interventions will be based on trial and error. For example, with exercise. When we exercise, we release inflammation into our system. However, we also release antioxidants, and the higher intensity an exercise routine is, the higher amount of antioxidants. So play this out with me. Let's say that you have 30 minutes worth of antioxidants, and I do a 60-minute exercise routine. I've outkicked my coverage and I'm going to be releasing excessive amounts of inflammation into my system. On the contrary, if I have 60 minutes worth of antioxidants and I perform a 30-minute routine, I'm probably going to be sitting pretty. When I'm working with a patient, I have to be able to formulate a plan that is based on their current health status. I will typically recommend high-intensity exercise if possible. But if you have some serious medical condition or just so deconditioned that it isn't possible, then we'll have to work our way up to that. I've had people in the past whose current health is so poor that we just have to start by moving their arms and legs while lying in bed. But the goal is always to be able to build up until we can get back to doing high intensity exercise. High intensity meaning that it would be difficult for you to hold a conversation during that activity because you're breathing so hard. Something else that is often overlooked is one ability to manage stress. Stress plays a major role in nearly, if not all, of your bodily systems. I won't go into detail here as I've put out a video in the past on the effect of stress on your body systems, but for the sake of this conversation, it's important to know that stress can play a role in the pulmonary system, the cardiovascular system, and the nervous system. Now, when talking about stress, another important thing to note is that we've all got stress, but how much stress you feel is a very subjective thing. When your brain senses something stressful, it's like a switch is flipped. Your whole system gets sent into overdrive, triggering a flood of stress hormones into your bloodstream. Your breathing speeds up, your heart starts racing, and you feel wired. In true moments of danger, that energy surge would help fight or run away. And then, when you are out of danger, the stress response would be switched off, no harm done. But when that stress response doesn't go away, one of those hormones, cortisol, keeps on flowing, and now our stress response can't fully shut down. Over time, we get burnt out, which can lead to high blood sugar, a weakened immune system, and elevated blood sugar, all increasing to the risk of developing cognitive decline. So now that we have your mitochondria producing ATP, we can move into step 3. And step 3 takes a lot more trial and effort on your part. An important thing to understand is that just because your mitochondria have the resources necessary to create more ATP, that doesn't mean that your brain has mitochondria. Mitochondria are within all your cells. But remember, we're talking about the health of your brain. So what is the population of mitochondria like within your brain? If we continue using the example of a gas station, imagine you live in Colorado, which is where I live. And for some strange reason, there isn't any gas stations in Colorado, but there are 10,000 in New Jersey. That doesn't really help us out any, does it? Now, the same thing applies here. When I'm managing my blood sugar, making sure that my pulmonary and my cardiovascular systems are working well, and I have high levels of anti-inflammatories, those are all important. But remember, mitochondria are within every cell of your body. So if I'm only improving the mitochondria within my muscular system, how does that benefit my brain? On top of that, if my cognition has been on a downhill slide for some time now, I may have a lower population of mitochondria within the brain. So is there a way to make sure that A, the existing mitochondria within my brain are given all the prerequisites to create ATP, and B, is there a way to make more mitochondria? How can I make it to where Colorado also has 10,000 pumps? The answer is we actually have to use our brain. We have to activate our brain. Remember, our body is all about efficiency. And so if I don't do any cognitively stimulating task all day, my brain isn't going to expend extra energy building and forming new connections. Think about how if you've ever been on a road trip and those long stretches of interstate where nobody lives, you see one gas station like every 50 miles, as compared to being in the city when you can find fuel on every corner. There's no use in placing a ton of stations where nobody goes, right? On the contrary, if the population is high, adding more stations is justified. Your brain is no different. If you're not engaging certain areas of your brain, why would it put more effort into placing a pump or mitochondria there? The general rule here is that if you want to become better at something or improve the function of certain areas within your brain, you have to do the task that that brain region is responsible for. Who would have thought? If you want to get better at pickleball, you actually have to play pickleball. And the learning is very specific. For example, I was recently having a discussion with one of the owners of my jiu-jitsu gym, and we were discussing a newer teaching style that is making its way into gyms across the country called the ecological method. Just to simplify it down for you, I want you to imagine that I taught you how to strangle someone, and then you drill all the steps over and over and over on a compliant partner, someone who is allowing you to choke them. That may be useful, but is it the most useful in regards to what you are training for? If you want to be able to sneak up behind someone and strangle them, then maybe it works if I'm real sneaky and real fast. But the real learning takes place when you're placed in a live situation where you're still trying to strangle this person, but they're also actively trying to defend that from happening. Being able to perform a task such as a strangle on someone who is letting it happen, as opposed to someone who knows what's happening and still can't stop it from happening, is two totally different things. So going back to activating certain areas of your brain, make that task as tailored as you can. If you seem to always forget something at the grocery store, you could just do memory games and probably see a benefit, but I would make it even more specific to the activity that you want to become better at. Try to remember just a few items at first. Go to the supermarket and get all those things first. Don't look at your list until you have accomplished the task of getting the handful of items that you were supposed to remember. Then, week after week, expand the amount of items that you're supposed to remember until you can get to the point that you no longer need that list at all. Now, depending on the degree of demise that has taken place within your brain, it may not always be that simple. That's kind of why I have a job. My day-to-day consists of trying to isolate the areas within someone's brain that isn't functioning as well as it should, and then coming up with a tailored plan to activate those areas. Up to this point, all of our focus has been on the fuel source, making sure that there is gas at the pump and improving the quality of those pumps. As we move into step 4, our attention now shifts away from the fuel source and onto the vehicle itself. How well does the vehicle run? If all issues with a motorized vehicle could be simplified down into either having or not having fuel, things would be pretty simple, but it just doesn't work that way. Once we have reached this stage of the game, we aren't satisfied with simply giving the neurons that we already have more fuel. No siree, now we want to make those neurons form new and stronger connections, as well as create completely new neurons. I really like automobiles, and so the example I think about is we aren't satisfied with simply filling up our tank. No, we want to make modifications on our vehicles now, make it look nicer and perform better. And considering there's extra room in the garage, we might as well also buy some more vehicles as well. I want you to notice how in that last example, I gave you two possibilities. One being to make modifications to the vehicle in which you already own, and the other being adding to your collection and buying more vehicles. That was intentional because we're talking about something called neuroplasticity as well as neurogenesis. If we discuss neuroplasticity first, neuroplasticity will largely depend on, once again, using your brain. Just like when you learn anything new for the first time, you aren't good at it, but over time, with enough practice, you're able to pick up that skill and become better at it. The same thing applies here. Whatever task that you want to improve, you will have to perform that task over and over until plasticity forms. The repetitive nature, coupled with the intensity, duration, timing, etc., will lead to new connections forming within your brain. Neuroplasticity makes for improving the quality of the connections between your already existing neurons, like spending time with a friend or a loved one and deepening the relationship between you two. Now, completely separate from neuroplasticity is neurogenesis. Neurogenesis being the production of new neurons. Important note though, neurogenesis doesn't take place in every region of your brain, and so you can't just walk through life and take absolutely no care of your brain in hopes of one day when you're older harnessing the power of this neurogenesis thing to regrow all the neurons that you have lost. It doesn't quite work like that, at least as of today. This is what I was referring to when I was talking about buying a completely new car, adding another vehicle to the fleet. Through the use of things like exercise and intermittent fasting, or even staying away from alcohol, you can promote more neurogenesis. And I think about it from the perspective that each and every day we are losing neurons. But if we can continuously be making new ones, it will in return slow down the rate of decline. It's not likely that you'll ever be able to create more neurons than you're losing. But if we can just offset that amount, we're at least placing ourselves in a state to age well. By now, you should be noticing some significant improvement in your cognition. In this next step, what we want to do is promote autophagy. If you don't know what that means, it's basically the spring cleaning that takes place within your brain, getting rid of all the junk and damaged neurons or proteins and cells. If you're having issues with your ability to get and especially stay asleep, getting to the bottom of this issue will be critical. Reason being is due to something called the glymphatic system. The glymphatic system is the system that comes online when we're asleep, and its job is to go and clean up all the debris within our brain. It cleans the slate in preparation for the next day. Think about if you were to go a significant period of time without cleaning your home. In the beginning, things might not be that bad unless you have young children or animals, but eventually dust starts to pile up and things just aren't as clean. The same thing applies to our sleep. A poor night or two every now and then isn't so much of a big deal, but if it's night after night that I don't get a good night's rest and this glymphatic system never comes online to clean up, there's more and more debris that lives within my brain. Other things that have been shown to promote autophagy is exercise and intermittent fasting and various supplements. Last but not least, we move into chemicals. I want you to take a second and just ponder on all the stuff that we've gone through before making it to this stage, and yet so many providers immediately start here. This is exactly what I was referring to earlier when we discussed how in all other aspects of life, there are steps that need to be met before moving on to the next. If you immediately jump to this stage, we're assuming that you already have healthy mitochondria and healthy neurons already, but for some reason, there are chemicals that are reducing the transmission speed between neurons, leading to cognitive impairment. Providers who immediately jump to chemicals will say, well, we got to do a detox and get all these heavy metals or mold or start chelation. And of course, there are exceptions to the rule. And this is why there should be a heavy importance placed on a detailed history before starting any intervention. But in the vast majority of situations, this is something that we save for the end. And even then, at least for me, if a patient is feeling really good, I might not even risk messing with chemicals. I like getting people better, and so the reward has to significantly outweigh the risk. What do I mean? Well, for one, before jumping into removing chemicals and heavy metals, you have to have a baseline level of health. And even then, things may not turn out as splendid as you were hoping. Something that can be done for detoxing heavy metals is called chelation. I want to spend a moment talking about this because I think it's important, especially when dealing with cognitive impairment. When pursuing chelation, you're ingesting a chelating agent, which in a perfect world is meant to bind onto this toxin and escort it out of the body and get rid of it. However, there is a possibility that when using a chelating agent, they can redistribute this toxin to other locations, and in the event that it's redistributed to your brain, these chelating agents have a very difficult time making their way into the brain due to the blood-brain barrier. So, depending on your level of health and overall physicality, we may jump into removing chemicals or we may just let it lie. This is typically an open dialogue that I have with the patient and allow them to assess how they currently feel and ask if they would like to continue on or not. Some patients will say, I feel so much better than I did and I'm happy with this, so I don't want to risk anything. Others will say, I don't want to stop here. I understand the risk, but I'd like to continue on. And that takes the burden off of me, so long as I feel like I've given the patient the ability to make an informed decision versus just forcing my decision upon them. And on top of that, in the event that we do decide to go after chemicals, unless the levels are extremely high and that patient has a fair degree of health, I will usually steer away from chelation and proceed down a less intensive route like reducing your exposure, repairing the blood-brain barrier, improving liver detox pathways, and loading up on antioxidants. And then if you still want to go dig a little bit deeper and are up for the challenge, then I may promote it as an option then. If you've made it this far, I want to give a big thanks to you. I'm a firm believer that time is our most valuable resource. Time is the one and only thing that we cannot manufacture and get more of once it has passed us by, at least as of today. And so with that being said, I'm grateful for your attention. You could have given it to anything or anyone and you chose to invest it with me. I don't take that lightly. So sincerely thank you. My hope was to show you that when it comes to improving the health of your brain, it's complicated. And there's no one right answer or one fix-all pill that you can take. And with that, ideally, it gives you some confidence in knowing that even though I've tried all these brain supplements and seen no benefits thus far, there are some answers and maybe a better path to take, a path that is specific to me and one that sets my brain up for the best chance at aging well. I hope you liked it. If you have any questions, please leave them below or send me an email. Until next time.